The north had always been cold, but the chill that came after the war with the Night King was something else. People thought it was just winter, but there was something deeper in the air, something uneasy. After the battle, Jon Snow had returned to Winterfell not as a hero, but as a man carrying too many secrets. The people cheered when he rode in, dirty from war, blood still on his sword, eyes dark like he hadn't slept in days. They called him the savior of the realm. Even Arya stood near the gates, arms crossed, watching him with pride. Sansa smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about him was different. At first, no one questioned it. They celebrated. There were feasts in the hall, and songs sung about the battle of ice and fire. Jon said little, sitting silently while others drank and laughed. He barely touched his food. Ghost stayed close to him, quiet and alert like he sensed something. Others didn't. 2 weeks passed, and things slowly started to shift. Jon began holding closed meetings with a few northern lords, ones loyal to him more than the Starks. Sansa wasn't invited. Neither was Arya. He said it was about protecting the realm, building a stronger north. But people whispered that he was planning something bigger. One night, Arya saw Jon walking alone into the woods behind Winterfell. She followed, quiet, like only she could be. He walked far until he reached an old weirwood tree, one with red leaves and a face carved deep. There he knelt and started whispering things, strange things, not prayers, not names. It sounded like commands. Arya waited until he left, then checked the ground. The snow wasn't disturbed much, but she noticed something odd. Burned bones. Near the roots, small, broken ones. Not animal, not fresh. When she returned, she didn't tell anyone. Not yet. By the 3rd week, Jon had taken full command of the Winterfell guards. He said the realm needed order, and that chaos would only bring more war. Sansa didn't argue. Not openly, but behind closed doors, she asked Arya, "He's changed, hasn't he?" Arya only nodded. The first real sign came when a raven arrived. From the Vale, Lord Robin had been found dead in his chambers, poisoned. Jon was the first to read the letter. He didn't call a council. He simply folded the parchment and said, "Accidents happen." That was it. No one saw the body. No one asked questions. But a few days later, the Knights of the Vale swore loyalty to Jon Snow. Some said he used fear. Others said he used gold. Sansa wanted to confront him, but Arya told her to wait. "Let him think we trust him," she said. "We need to see how far this goes." It went further than anyone imagined. Jon started sending ravens to old allies of Daenerys. Tyrion in chains down south, the Unsullied still waiting at the docks, the Dothraki wandering the riverlands. No one knew what he was saying. But then, word came that a group of Dothraki had arrived at Castle Black, guarding something, or someone. Arya rode north to check. She told no one. When she returned, her face was pale. "He's keeping her alive," she whispered to Sansa. "Daenerys, she's not dead," Sansa gasped. "That's not possible. He killed her." Arya shook her head. "No, he stabbed her, yes, but it didn't kill her. He's keeping her somewhere. Chained, sedated, like a prisoner." Sansa's hands trembled. "Why?" "I think he wants her power," Arya said. "Or maybe he's trying to take it, slowly." That night they called a meeting in secret. Brienne, Samwell, Gendry, a few loyal bannermen. They laid out everything they knew, everything they'd seen. Most didn't believe it, not yet. But a few looked uneasy. Brienne especially. She'd always defended Jon. But now, even she looked unsure. Then came the 4th week. Jon announced. He was marching south. Not to take the throne, he said, but to unify the fractured kingdoms. He said too many petty lords were fighting over scraps, and that the people needed peace, order, strength. "He's becoming a king," Sansa said quietly to the group, "without a crown, without asking, and no one was strong enough to stop." Arya tried. She slipped into his room one night, blade ready, but Ghost growled before she could move. Jon turned, calm as anything. "You came to kill me?" he asked. She didn't answer. "You should know better, Arya." "You can't kill." "Me, not yet, not until it's done." "What's done?" she asked. He stepped closer, eyes cold. "The world as we know it. I'm not saving it anymore, I'm reshaping it." Arya ran. By morning, she was gone from Winterfell, disguised, vanished. And Jon? He rode south with 500 men at his back, black, banners flying behind him. Winter had come, but not the kind they feared. The march south started slow. Jon didn't take the King's Road. He moved through small villages, quiet and unnoticed at first. His black-cloaked riders didn't bear stark banners, just a simple symbol stitched in silver, a dire wolf with wings. People didn't know what it meant, but they bowed anyway, some out of respect, most out of fear. He spoke little. At every stop, Jon called in the local lords, promised them protection, promised them food, promised them a place in his new realm. If they bent the knee, if they didn't, they vanished. No war, no siege, just gone. By the time he reached the Riverlands, 10 minor houses had already pledged to him. They said he was better than what was left of King's Landing, said the realm needed a sword, not a crown. And Jon, he looked the part. Worn armor, silent gaze, a wolf that moved like shadow beside him. He looked like a man who'd seen death and become it. Back in Winterfell, Sansa tried to hold what was left. People still believed in her, but messengers stopped returning. Northern men went missing. Brienne warned her. He's not just building a kingdom, he's cutting down anyone who won't follow. And still, Sansa hesitated. "He's my brother," she whispered one night. "He was raised here." Brienne looked down. So was Ramsay. Meanwhile, Arya had reached Dragonstone. She had taken a ship under a false name and rowed fast through the storm. She had one goal: find Daenerys. The island was half in ruin, but guarded by men who didn't speak Westerosi. Dothraki mostly, and some unsullied. But they didn't act like soldiers. They acted like prisoners, tired, drained, empty. At night, Arya slipped into the keep. She found Daenerys deep below, in a room without light, chained to a cold stone bed. Her hair had grown wild, her eyes were dull. She barely recognized Arya. "You're alive," Arya said. "Why?" Daenerys coughed. "He needs me, or something inside me." He said, "The fire, it belongs to him now." Arya didn't understand, but she didn't wait. She tried to free her, but the chains were soaked in dragonglass, old magic. Daenerys screamed when Arya touched them. Something burned in the air. Guards heard. Arya had to run. She left through the caves, barely escaping the cliffs. That same night, Daenerys' scream echoed through the whole keep. And far above, on the highest tower, a light flickered, the kind only fire can make. Word reached Jon by Raven. He burned the message in his hand, said nothing, just looked to the sky. "Time to wake the beast," he muttered. Then he turned south. By now the small folk whispered his name in fear. In King's Landing, the new council tried to prepare. Gendry was there. Sam, too. Tyrion's. Cell still hadn't opened. No one knew what to do. Sam wrote to Sansa. His words were clear. "He's not the man we knew. He wants something older than power." Sansa read the letter in silence. She ordered Winterfell locked. She posted guards at every gate. She looked to the old gods and prayed, not for guidance, but for survival. By the end of that week, Jon stood at the gates of Harrenhal. It wasn't a siege. The gates opened for him. The lord inside, old and bitter, welcomed Jon with a smile and a knife in his back. Jon didn't flinch. He just stepped over the body and claimed the keep. Harrenhal was cursed, everyone knew that. But Jon didn't care. He needed a place to work, and Harrenhal had tunnels deeper than history. His followers began calling him something new. Not king, Not warden, just one word, shadow flame. They said he carried the frost of the wall and the fire of the dragon. They said he had made a pact with something under the earth, something older than dragons. The stories grew darker. People went missing around Harrenhal. Farmers, servants, even ravens sent from the keep never returned. But no army moved against him. No lord stood up. Everyone was waiting, watching. And John was just getting started. In the dungeons of Harrenhal, he stood over a black stone altar, speaking to shadows no one else could see. Ghosts stood beside him. But even the direwolf looked thinner now, tired, mean. John placed a drop of his blood on the stone. "Bind the fire to the cold," he whispered. "Bind the queen to the king. Bind the north to the flame." Somewhere far off, Daenerys screamed. Again, and across the sea, in a forgotten place, something ancient stirred. Word of Harrenhal's fall didn't stay quiet for long. Whispers turned into fear. Small folk spoke of dark banners and colder nights. Lords who had once laughed off Jon Snow's power now locked their keeps and tripled their guards. But no one rode out to stop him. Not yet. In King's Landing, the new queen, Asha Greyjoy, held what was left of the Iron Throne. It wasn't much. A broken council, shattered city, and too many ghosts. She ruled with caution, keeping alliances. With the Reach and Dawn, but she knew trouble was coming. Gendry had returned to the capital after hearing the rumors. His armor was scorched from a fight near River Run. "He's not leading an army," Gendry said to the council. "He's leading a cult." Sam stood beside him. "He's using blood rituals. I found records, old Valyrian things, forbidden, even by their standards." Asha frowned. "You're saying Jon Snow has become a sorcerer?" Sam didn't answer. He didn't need to. Then came the night sky burn. A red streak lit up the heavens. Fire, trailing across the stars like a crack in the world. It was seen from dawn to the wall. In Winterfell, even the ravens screamed. The Meisters had no name for it, just one thought. Something had awoken. Arya watched it from the ship she'd taken from Dragonstone. She had barely escaped. And now, she knew why. Whatever Jon was doing, it wasn't just about power. He was changing the rules of life and death. She reached King's Landing by sea. Gendry found her first. She told them everything about Daenerys, the dragonglass chains, the whispers in the dark. Asha was furious. He lied to the world. He didn't kill the Dragon Queen. He imprisoned her. That makes him a traitor to the realm. Arya shook her head. "It's worse than that. He's not trying to rule the realm, he's trying to reshape it." The council argued for days. Some wanted to send assassins, others wanted to negotiate. Sam said none of it would matter. "You don't negotiate with someone who believes he's a god," he said quietly. "You stop him, or you die trying." Back in Harrenhal, Jon had built something monstrous. The central tower glowed at night, veins of fire running through its stones. No one dared enter the inner sanctum except his most loyal, men who had burned their old names and sworn oaths in blood. They called themselves the Black Flame. Jon rarely spoke now. When he did, his voice was colder, deeper, as if something else was speaking through him. One night he stood at the top of the tower, overlooking the land. "They called me a bastard," he said to the wind. "Now they'll call me the Beginning." The next morning, 5 towns near Harrenhal were burned to ash. No survivors, no signs of battle, just a black mark in the earth and the smell of fire that didn't die. Sansa finally made her move. She sent Brienne south with 100 riders, not to fight but to find the truth, to see if Jon could still be reached, to see if there was anything left of the man they'd once called brother. When Brienne reached Harrenhal, Jon came out to meet her. He wore black armor now, no sigils, just raw iron, lined with red streaks. Like dried blood, Ghost stood beside him, scarred and silent. "Why are you here?" he asked. I came to remind you who you are, Brienne said. You were once a man of honor. Jon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Honor is for the weak. You of all people should know that. She stepped closer. What happened to Daenerys? She's still with me, Jon said, and soon she'll be part of everything. Brienne raised her sword. Then I'll stop you. Jon didn't flinch. Try. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. Jon moved like a shadow, faster than she remembered. He didn't kill her, but he broke her. One swing shattered her. Sword. Another knocked her to her knees. He leaned close. Tell Sansa the old world is dying. She can join me, or be buried with it. Brienne was left alive. Barely. Her riders found her crawling out of the woods the next day. When she returned to Winterfell, she couldn't speak for 3 days. But when she did, her words chilled everyone to the bone. That's not Jon Snow anymore. The North began to fracture. Some still supported him. Others started to panic. The wildlings beyond the wall, hearing strange tales, began moving south. Again, fleeing something, and in a hidden room deep in King's Landing, Sam opened the last book he'd smuggled from the Citadel, one written in blood, one even the Maesters had sealed away. He read one line out loud. When ice drinks fire and death wears a name, the world ends not in cold, but in shadow. Everyone went silent, because now Jon Snow had both. After Brienne came back broken and burned, Winterfell stopped pretending. The halls were quiet. Sansa no longer spoke of peace. Her face was carved from stone now. She gathered every raven, sent out every scout, and she called the old bannermen again, not to honor the past, but to prepare for war. Still, not everyone followed. Some remembered Jon, the hero, the one who died for the Watch, the one who faced the Night King with nothing but a blade and grit. They couldn't believe what the rumors said, but the fires proved them wrong. From Harrenhal, the flames spread like a sickness, not just fire, black fire, fire that didn't burn wood, fire that melted minds. Whole villages were found with people. Standing still, their eyes burned out, their mouths smiling. It wasn't war, it was erasure, and Jon, he didn't hide. He sent ravens to the lords of Westeros, not letters, warnings. Each bird carried the same words: "You had your age, now make way for mine." In King's Landing, Asha Greyjoy stood before her broken throne, staring at the note. "He's not coming for a crown," she said. "He's coming for a graveyard." Sam came next, holding a map. "He's heading east now, not toward the capital, toward Oldtown." The room went silent. Oldtown held the Citadel, the oldest books, the deepest secrets, the last thing Jon needed. Arya didn't wait. She took a horse and rode south before anyone could stop her. "I can't kill him," she said to Gendry. "I'll find someone who can." But she wasn't the only one moving. In the north, a few old houses broke away from Winterfell, riding south to join Jon. House Umber, House Serwyn, even some Tully men, twisted by old grudges. They believed Jon would build a new realm where loyalty was all that mattered, and they were ready to burn everything else for it. Sansa stood at the gate as they left. She didn't stop them, didn't call them traitors. She just whispered, "You'll be the first he sacrifices." Back in Harrenhal, Jon stood before a circle of his black flame. He wore no helmet, no cloak, just a scar across his chest that glowed faint red, pulsing like a second heart. Daenerys was no longer screaming. She was silent now, her body thinner, her skin pale, her hair white as snow. But her eyes were golden, burning from the inside. He stood over her. "Soon," he whispered, "your fire, my frost, the balance." Behind him the black altar cracked. A scream, ancient and wordless, echoed from the ground. In Oldtown, Sam had beaten Jon there. Barely. He found the High Septon hiding in the library vaults, clutching old scrolls and muttering nonsense. Sam slapped him back to sense. "We need the vault opened," he said. "The one sealed since the doom." The Septon trembled. "That knowledge is cursed." Good, Sam said. So is he. They opened it with fire and blood. Inside, they found things not meant to be. Read. Maps of Valyria before the doom, rituals written in tongues lost to time, and one prophecy, scrawled by mad monks. The North, born of ice, the Queen of Flame, bound by death, shall remake the sky in shadow. Sam stared at it. Gendry grabbed. The parchment. This is Jon and Daenerys. Arya entered the room right then, her face cold. We're running out of time. They didn't argue. Jon reached the gates of Oldtown 3 days later. He didn't march. He floated. The air around him shimmered. The river boiled as he passed. And behind him, Daenerys walked, barefoot, unchained, her skin glowing like heated steel. The guards opened the gates, not because they were ordered, because they couldn't move. Their swords turned to ash. Their courage drowned. Jon entered the citadel without resistance. He climbed to the top, where the old tower reached the sky. There he raised both hands, and the sky went black, not like night, but like absence, like something had erased the... A voice echoed over the land. Not his, not hers, but both. All kingdoms end. Now begins the realm of shadow. And then... silence. In King's Landing, every flame flickered. In Winterfell, Sansa fell to her knees as her breath fogged in her own hall. The sea froze on the Iron Islands, and dragons, hidden, wild, forgotten, howled from the east, sensing something greater than blood. Jon Snow had become more than king, more than conqueror. He had become myth. After the sky turned black over Oldtown, the world didn't know what time it was anymore. Days felt like nights. The sun rose, but barely. Just a pale glow behind thick clouds. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind changed. It didn't blow from the sea or the mountains anymore. It came from the south, from him. Jon Snow didn't claim Oldtown. He emptied it. The citadel was abandoned in 2 days. Scrolls burned themselves on shelves. Ravens stopped flying. The Maesters either vanished or turned mad, walking in circles and mumbling names no one remembered. And Daenerys, she followed him silently. She no longer looked like a queen. She looked like something made of light and fire and sorrow. Her eyes flickered with gold, her hands shimmered faintly. But she never spoke, never touched, just walked behind Jon like a shadow that burned instead of darkened. The world finally understood. This wasn't about kingdoms. It wasn't about revenge. This was about remaking reality. Back in Winterfell, Sansa stood before a map that no longer made sense. Lines between regions were useless. Alliances didn't matter. Soldiers? What use were they against whatever Jon had become? But still she tried. She sent ravens to Dawn, to the Iron Bank, to Essos, promised gold, land, survival. Few replied. The smart ones had already gone into hiding. The others were either dead or already following Jon, hoping he'd spare them when he tore down the world. Brienne had recovered enough to walk again. She stood beside Sansa and asked, "What if there's no stopping him?" Sansa looked out the window. "Then we don't stop him. We kill him." Far from the north, Arya had returned to the Riverlands. There was one man she needed, someone who knew shadows better than most. The Hound. She found him in a burned-out village, living like a ghost, half his face more scar than man, a blade always within reach. At first, he refused. "I already died once for this realm," he growled. "Ain't dying again?" But when Arya told him what Jon had become, and that Daenerys still walked, alive but hollow, the Hound stared at the fire for a long time. "Burning things that should stay dead," he muttered. "Fine, one more swing." Together, they rode east. Meanwhile, Jon crossed into the Stormlands. No banners flew against him, no army rose. The castle simply opened their gates, offering no resistance. Some begged for mercy. Jon gave them silence. Then the towers crumbled in ash, the rivers boiled, and black vines spread across the ground. Like veins, he was changing the land. Where he walked, nature twisted. Trees bent in unnatural shapes. Wolves grew bigger, eyes red like embers. Crows spoke in tongues. The very rules of life and death seemed to shift. And still, Daenerys followed. Inside his tent, if you could call it that, Jon sat before a mirror of obsidian, no reflection, just flickers of other worlds, ones with burning skies, frozen oceans, places where men had no faces. He stared into it for hours, whispering in tongues no one had heard since before Valyria. Sam, Arya, Gendry and the Hound met again near the ruins of Highgarden. That's where they found him. The last man who might still hold something to fight Jon. Bran the Broken. He was not the boy they remembered. His eyes saw more than just the present. He barely moved, barely blinked, but when Arya stepped near, he spoke first. "You're late," he said. "He's already started folding the walls between life and shadow." Sam sat across from him. "Can he be stopped?" Bran didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Only by something that never belonged here, something older than dragons, older than men." Arya narrowed her eyes. "What?" Bran looked at her. "You." The camp went quiet. Bran explained it slowly. "You carry death with you, not just kills. You've walked beyond death, the faces, the training. You've touched what lies behind the veil. Jon hasn't." Gendry stepped forward. "She can kill him." Bran nodded once. "If she reaches him before the final joining." "The what?" Arya asked. "When Jon and Daenerys become one," Bran said. "Not by love, not by marriage, by fire and frost. If that happens, the world won't end in war. It'll end in silence." Sam swallowed hard. "Then we need to move now." Bran's eyes went white for a moment. When he came back, he said, "He's already begun the joining on Dragonstone." Arya mounted her horse. "Then that's where I go." Bran called after her. "You'll need one more thing. Something from the shadows." He handed her a blade. It wasn't steel, it wasn't dragon glass, it was bone, black, curved, humming slightly. "Only this can cut what he's become." Arya took it. The Hound rode beside her. "One last job, girl." Arya didn't smile. From the cliffs above, as they rode, Bran whispered to the air, "This is the last turn in the wheel. Let it be the one that breaks." And far away, on the black rocks of Dragonstone, Jon Snow stood at the edge of the sea, Daenerys behind him, and the sky split in half. He whispered, "It's time." The waters around Dragonstone boiled as Arya's ship approached. It wasn't just heat, it was pressure, like the sea itself didn't want to touch the island anymore. The sky above was still cracked from Jon's ritual. A bleeding scar ran across the clouds, red and grey, pulsing like a living wound. Arya stood at the bow, the black bone blade strapped to her back. The Hound stood next to her, arms crossed. He looked at the island like it was hell itself. "I don't like this," he growled. "Feels like walking into a burning grave." Arya didn't answer. They docked at night. No guards, no sound. The air was heavy and wrong. The castle had changed, towers twisted upward like claws, stones blackened, windows glowing faint orange, as if the fire inside never died. Ghosts, or things like them, moved in the fog. Faces without form, eyes that blinked out of nowhere. They entered slowly. The gates didn't creak. They opened on their own. Inside they found unsullied statues, not men, statues, frozen mid-step, weapons raised, eyes wide, as if time itself had stopped them. Arya touched one. It crumbled like sand. The Hound whispered, "What in the name of all the dead is he doing here?" She didn't know, but she kept walking. Deep in the belly of the castle, the fire burned brighter. It wasn't red. It wasn't orange. It was white, pure, blinding. And at the center of it stood her, Daenerys, barefoot, skin like marble, eyes glowing, hair floating even with no wind. She didn't speak, didn't blink. She just turned her head slowly as if hearing something behind Arya. She's not alive, the hound muttered. She's not dead either. Behind the flame, a voice spoke. You made it. Arya stepped forward. Jon! He walked into view, taller, thinner, cloaked in black that moved like smoke. His eyes glowed faint blue, like ice catching moonlight, but his voice still had that same calm coldness it always had. Only now, there was something else inside it. You came to stop me, he said. I came to finish it, Arya said. Whatever. You are now. It ends here. Jon smiled, a small, almost pitying smile. You think this is about me? She drew the bone blade. You've killed lords, burned cities, twisted the sky. I've fixed what was broken, he said sharply. I've silenced the wheel. I've ended the dance. No kings, no queens, no more Targaryens, no more Starks. Just one world, one will. Arya stepped forward, but Daenerys raised a hand. Arya stopped cold. The air went thick, heavy. Her knees buckled slightly, her breath frosted. She's not stopping me, Jon said. She's becoming me. Arya's eyes widened. You're merging with her, he nodded. Fire and ice, the song of the end. The hound stepped forward, dragging his sword. Then sing your last verse, boy. But Daenerys moved, faster than wind. She was on him in a blink. Her hand grabbed his chest. Not stabbing, just touching. His armor burned, his skin blackened. He screamed. Arya lunged. Jon met her mid-air. Steel and bone clashed. Not with noise, with silence. The kind that sucks the sound out of your ears. Their blades danced, his made of dark glass, hers of death bone. Each strike tore the air. Each. Movement broke the stone beneath their feet. Jon spoke between strikes. You still think this is about family? Clang! You think I betrayed something? Clash. I became what the world needed. Their swords locked. Arya stared into his eyes. You became what you feared. And then she slipped beneath his guard, the way only she could. A twist. A move. The blade sank into his ribs, the one place still flesh, still warm. Jon froze. His eyes dimmed. Daenerys let out a single sound, not a scream, not a word, just a breath, like wind leaving the sails of the world. And then nothing, no explosion, no thunder, just quiet. The castle cracked. The fires died. Jon fell to his knees. His eyes met Arya's one last time. Thank you, he whispered. And then he fell. Daenerys collapsed behind him. Her body, for the first time, looked human, cold, peaceful, as if her soul had finally been released. Arya dropped the blade. The hound, burned and bleeding, limped toward her. Is it done? She looked at the ash gathering on the ground, the stone turning back to grey, the sky outside clearing for the first time in weeks. I think so, she said. But deep below the castle, something still hummed, a flicker of blue, a whisper of flame, and a mark in the stone floor. Not a crown, not a sigil, just a circle, waiting. Dragonstone had stopped burning, but the island still felt wrong. After Jon fell, Arya and the hound stood in the throne room for what felt like hours. Neither spoke. Daenerys' body had gone cold, finally still. Jon's, too. No breath, no flicker of frost or flame. Just a man lying dead at the edge of a world he tried to change. The black bone blade had cracked after the strike. It lay in two pieces at Arya's feet. Now what? The hound asked. Arya didn't answer. She looked at Jon's face. Peaceful, almost relieved. Not the face of a madman, not even a tyrant. Just tired. They buried Daenerys first. Deep beneath. The keep, where old kings had once slept in stone. The fire in her eyes was gone, but something about her expression stayed warm, like she had finally been freed from something ancient and cruel. They burned Jon. The pyre was set high on the cliffs, the wind wild around it. Arya lit it herself. The fire rose fast. It didn't resist his body. There was no strange magic, no Screams, no signs of dark gods, just smoke and then ash. The hound said nothing, just watched with one hand on his sword, as if waiting for the fire to talk back. But it didn't. By the time they sailed back, the sky had cleared. Blue, soft, birds returned. The sea sang again. All across Westeros, the world began to breathe. In King's Landing, the clouds parted. The shattered red keep stood tall in the sunlight. People came out of hiding. Bells rang for the first time since the fall. Sansa arrived with the Northmen a week later. She met Arya outside the gates. "Is it done?" she asked. Arya just nodded. They didn't cry. Not for Jon. Not for Daenerys. They stood silent, letting the world move without words. Gendry arrived next. Then Sam. Brienne. Even Bran was wheeled into the city, his eyes dull, his voice quiet. They gathered in the old council chamber, the same place where so many kings and queens had risen and fallen. Now it was full of faces that had seen too. Much Gendry spoke first. "He's gone, so what now?" No one answered. Sam looked to Bran. "You saw what he was becoming. You knew what it would cost. Was he evil?" Bran didn't look at him. "No, just done waiting." Sansa narrowed her eyes. "Waiting for what?" Bran finally looked up. "For the world to stop turning." Arya leaned forward. "He tried to break the wheel." Bran nodded. "And he did. The old families, the old gods, the fire and the frost, they're gone now." Gendry slammed a fist on the table. "Then what are we left with?" No one answered, because none of them knew. That night, Arya walked through the city alone. People stared at her like she was a ghost. Children whispered her name. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She stopped near the ruins of the Sept, where so much blood had been spilled. There, a boy sat drawing in the dirt. Arya peeked over his shoulder. He was sketching a man in black, with wings of smoke, and eyes like fire and snow. She crouched. "What's his name?" The boy didn't even look up. "Shadowflame." Arya felt her stomach twist. She walked away fast. In the Reach, the crops bloomed again. In dawn, the sun blazed warm, not burning. On the wall, the snows melted a little. Wildlings came down, not in fear, but with stories of a man who had passed through their dreams, whispering promises. "He said we'd be safe," one of them told Sam, "even after he was gone." Sam didn't know what to say, because here's what they didn't want to admit, even to themselves. The world was better now. No wars, no thrones, no dragons in the sky, no night kings, no walkers, no burning cities, just peace. Uneasy, yes. Haunted, sure. But peace, and that begged the question no one could answer. Was Jon Snow right? Was his destruction a curse, or a gift? Brienne stood at his old grave in the north weeks later. She knelt, placing his broken sword in the ground. "He saved us," she whispered. Behind her, Sansa watched, arms crossed. "Or doomed us," she said. Arya never returned to Winterfell. She sailed west again, further than before. Some say she went to find a place untouched by Jon's shadow. Others said she wanted to make sure his spirit hadn't followed. The hound vanished too. Only Bran remained silent, sitting in the Godswood beneath a tree that now grew black leaves. His eyes closed, his lips barely moved. And deep below Dragonstone, and where no one dared return, that circle in the stone still pulsed faintly, not dead, not asleep, just waiting. Years passed. People stopped saying his name, at first out of fear, then out of habit, and eventually out of hope. The kingdoms rebuilt, slowly, painfully. No one claimed the Iron Throne again. It had melted under Daenerys once, and no one had the will to put it back. The realm was ruled by council now, lords and ladies chosen by the people, advised by what remained of the old families. No kings, no queens, just order. Some said that was Jon Snow's final victory. Others said it was a scar that never healed. Winterfell grew. Again, stone by stone, Sansa ruled the north wisely, but never warmly. She smiled in public, held councils, raised children. But those closest to her said she never slept more than a few hours a night. Said she sometimes wandered the halls, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Arya was never seen again. Her ship was spotted once, near the edge of the world, where the waters fall into mist and the stars shine different. Sailors said she stood at the bow with a blade in her hand, watching something in the waves, something that moved. Brienne taught new knights, boys and girls who didn't care about noble names, just honor. She kept Jon's story quiet. Not out of fear, but out of pity. He carried the world too long, she'd say. Eventually it crushed him. Sam became Grand Maester. He wrote the history books himself with shaking hands and teary eyes. But in every page he left out one: truth. The truth they all agreed to hide, that Jon Snow never fully died. Because something lingered. Strange things began to happen. In the ruins of Harrenhal, black vines returned, quiet at first, then growing. The sea near Dragonstone boiled again, once a year, always on the same night. The night Jon burned. And in the north, at the edge of the world, wildlings told stories by fire. Stories of a man in black seen walking the snow, barefoot, silent, leaving no tracks. Wolves walked beside him. His eyes burned blue and red. Shadow Flame, they called him still. A warning, not a name. Bran heard it too. He had grown pale. In his chair, the world behind his eyes, endless. When Sam visited, Bran looked at him and said, "The balance was never meant to be kept forever." Sam asked, "What happens now?" Bran closed his eyes. It begins again. Far beneath Dragonstone, no one remembered the old tunnels, but the earth did. And in the deepest part, where light could not reach, the black circle on the floor still pulsed once every few hours, and then one night it pulsed twice. A shadow flickered across the wall. A faint breath filled the air, and from the stone two shapes rose, not full, not solid. One white-haired, one dark-eyed. No words were spoken, just a touch between them, and then silence. Not death. Dormancy. Back in Winterfell, a raven slammed against the window of Sansa's chambers. Bleeding from the eyes, its claws clutched a single piece of skin, not parchment skin, and burned into it was one sentence: "Fire rests. Ice watches." She stood frozen for minutes. Then she whispered, "You promised it was over." In the citadel, Sam's candle blew out. In the south, Gendry saw frost on his forge in summer, and in the far west, Arya's ship rocked violently. Her eyes snapped open in the dark. She reached for the blade. Not the broken one. A new one. Sharper, hungrier. She looked over the waves. Something was coming, something she knew. She smiled barely. "Thought I'd seen the last of you." And the stars went dark.